Hey guys, how are you? Welcome back to the Web3 Workers Pod. This is Hazel. This week is just me. Dan is not here today because he's at an apparently really exciting festival or art festival or something in the UK. And Mia has moved on to do other projects. But this week we are really excited to have Stefen with us to have a chat. Stefen is the growth lead and community lead at the project called Govrn, which is a project I've been following for a long time and been a great fan of. And he's also the president of the Carribbean Blockchain Alliance. We had a great conversation. We met in New York, and we are chatting everything about Web3 tech, how it serves workers, how it can potentially empower workers through changing the way that people think about compensation, think about like owning their own projects. And we would welcome all comments, challenges, questions. Engage with us through Twitter, engage with us through the podcast. We would love to hear from you. So before further ado, this is the conversation. Hello. This is the Web3 Workers Pod. This is Hazel, and today we're honored to have Stefen with us today to talk about everything about Web3 tech and workers and reputation and whatever not. Stefen, would you tell us a little bit more about yourself first, please? Thanks.
Sure. I guess I could do a little background. So my background is economics. I got into the space actually because I wanted to, I had a lot of experience in the econ world and a little in the finance world. And I got interested in that whole fintech revolution, quote unquote. But I realized really quickly that a lot of the stated, I guess, attributes of fintech turned out to be false hopes in the sense of, being separated from traditional finance or traditional financial system, and also being in interactions that people all over the world could actually interact with. And then once I started playing around with it and really exploring, I realized it was not at all separate from the traditional financial system. It was fully a part of it. And at the same time, it wasn't global. I should also mention I'm from the Bahamas, and I spend a lot of time focusing on issues in the Caribbean. And most of the fintech, platforms, apps, the things that many people are used to, like Venmo, Cash App, stuff like that, don't work at all. There's no access. So I was really disheartened. And then I started paying attention to this whole blockchain thing. And I realized really quickly it could be, in some ways, that interaction that I didn't have before, where one, it is completely separate, or at least as much as possible, separate from the traditional financial system. And it is also global by default, in that anyone all over the world, once they have, at least internet access, they can actually access it. So that's when I realized, okay, this is what I want to focus my time on, figure out how to use this kind of tech or related tech to help, everyday people, especially in the global South. And of course, in ways that, and we'll get into that later probably, in ways that are, fully worker focused, fully maybe co-op style structures and things of that nature. But that led me to it was me and a small community of people. We started the Carribbean Blockchain Alliance, and that was mostly involved in advocacy for this blockchain tech. So we focused on mainly education. So we did a lot of webinars, workshops, a few small courses, things like that, as well as some policy-related interactions. But the whole goal of it was just to build up this community and get this kind of interaction, and just build excitement for what this could possibly be, for the Caribbean specifically as well. And in addition to that, I don't know how deep you want me to go, so I'll pause there.
There's so much to dig in there. Yeah, I think just leading to what you're probably gonna talk about. Yeah, you're one of the really rare people out there who works full time in Web3, right? What's that like? What's your personal experience working full time in Web3?
Oh man, beyond being incredibly chaotic, it's I can say I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of different areas throughout. Some good, some bad. And of course, the interesting thing about crypto and blockchain and everything around it, and most people probably think about this from the get-go, it is a whole ecosystem. It is a whole type of new technology, and it is one that, because of the permissionless layer, nature of it, anyone can interact with it, which also means that there's a lot of bad actors that can interact with it as well. But I think people, and sometimes us as well, we tend to focus on that, but we don't focus on the fact that the permissionless nature of it means that a lot of people, maybe in dire situations or situations where, and I can give examples as well, probably, situations where maybe they're in a. I'm trying to figure out how deep to go these examples, but I'll just say situations where maybe someone is shutting them out or taking away their access or is in some kind of authoritarian going through some kind of oppression. Because of the permissionless nature, that also means that these everyday individual people who are dealing on or surviving under these circumstances also can have some form of access to some form of power that they weren't able to access otherwise. So yeah, I mean that's something that I've really paid attention to, latched onto, and I think is really powerful. And my whole focus is, how do I build, or at least help the building of these kind of structures where we can really focus on the quote unquote the least of us, right? The people who are the most marginalized or the most oppressed.
Yeah. No, sounds good. Yeah, like no, there's so much there. It's like, how do you build and provide access to people, right, to the common people, whereas making sure that there are the right structures to keep them safe. And there are a lot of like nuances in there too. Like, are these structures going to provide it in like how are these like how are these like security and whatever things are going to be provisioned, right? Is it through regulation? It is through something else? Is it through morals? Like, it is through some like smart contract that nobody controls, that kind of thing. Yeah, no, I would actually, I feel like people would love to hear a little bit more about Govrn, because I feel like Govrn is one of the really cool projects who like you guys are spending a lot of time to build up like these provisions, right? The fundamental like kind of infrastructure layer for that ultimately will lead to some like worker, like some new change in worker compensation, how we think about work.
Exactly. So Govrn is where I actually work full time now, and that is for those who don't know. No, for sure. And if anyone doesn't know what Govrn is or what DAOs are, Govrn is a DAO tool company, but you can really just call it a community tool company, because DAOs are really just online communities that use blockchain for coordination or to make decisions. So what we focus on is this idea of, in these kind of organizations, in these kind of circumstances, what does a worker look like, and how do we make sure we are empowering these workers? So DAOs really, at least for the most part, they can really look like co-ops. And of course, with co-ops, they are traditionally worker owned. Workers have ownership. Workers also have voting power. So DAOs do tend to operate the same way, with some nuance and some difference. And of course, a lot of the time, both the ownership and the voting and democracy aspect include or interact with blockchain in some way. So what we're focused on is this idea of, okay, what does it mean for workers to have ownership in this new kind of scenario, in this new kind of environment? And we definitely think that this aspect of worker ownership, plus this idea of bottom-up governance, or working without a boss or working without a manager, you have to start somewhere. And that to us looks like owning the record of your work. So if you as an individual worker are saying that, hey, this is the work I've done, and you're showing that to maybe your peers or the rest of the workers or contributors, as we call them, that means that you don't have to rely on a boss above you to say, oh no, this is the work that Stefen's done. It's me being an autonomous agent, owning my agency and saying, no, this is what I've done. So that's how we've built it. So we're first focused on just you being able to own this record of, well, one, create, and then second, own this record of your work. And not to go too deep into it yet, but we also created this framework where other people can, just provide this kind of validation, just for, trust reasons, right? The people that you're working with or people you're working closely with can provide a validation or what we call an attestation of your work. And what that allows is, as you're interacting with everyone else, you can push your work up, as we call it, but you can put your work forward. Other people who know can verify it, and that allows for a kind of scaled trust where, because this kind of interaction is happening, we can eventually get to this point where we trust each other, and we don't necessarily have to worry about, oh, we have to have a manager to manage this. We can really just manage ourselves. And where the blockchain aspect comes in is that you can also, just for the sake of, deeper levels of ownership, you can put that record of work or these records of work on the blockchain. And what that looks like is, once it's there, now nobody can take that away from you. It sits in this, and obviously your listeners would know what a blockchain is, but it now sits on this database that is decentralized and is immutable, so that nobody can go in and change what you did or say that you didn't do it. So it's all these different little interactions, but it's also, we keep it very easy to use, so anyone can just jump on and say, okay, I'm as my own individual autonomous agent, I'm going to have the work that I've done in this particular area. And I always say I hate the word resume, but it does kind of become its own resume in a sense, and it becomes easier to, you don't have to rely on LinkedIn. You don't have to put some nonsense PDF together. You can actually have the specific things that you've done and the verification of it in this one place.
Right. No, that's super fascinating. Yeah, I have so many questions. Yeah. So I'm hearing that it's mostly self-attestation, right? Like, for example, I can just go on the platform and be like, I've done this. And I can get, and there are some kind of peer verification attestation too, whereas people can sort of attest to each other, they've done the work, right? So it's not something that's hierarchical, and your boss is like, you've done this, Trello board, tick off.
Right, exactly. And especially in terms of now where you have so many freelancers or people working in small collectives, the interaction has fundamentally shifted for more and more people to where, co-ops are global and they have a long history, but they've always been more in the minority in terms of, how many people work in co-ops compared to how many people work in traditional firms. But now, because of the internet, because of these kind of groups, we're seeing a lot more proliferation of these kind of bottom-up types of organizations.
Yeah, no, I guess I wonder, right? Then is the first use case or most obvious use case for Govrn, for the self-attestation part, is something like a very decentralized organizing framework instead of a more hierarchical company type of thing. Do you imagine co-ops or even unions or decentralized organizers, activists, and whatever to be one of the first possible use cases, because they are the people who are self-driven, right? That kind of fits in the framework of self-attestation instead of a corporation, instead of a group of people who need to heavily rely on each other in some ways to not block each other in their work or whatever, or not report to each other.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. These kind of structures are exactly what we're focused on, where people are people are acting in a much less hierarchical way, where they're relying on each other as maybe as equals or as peers. They don't necessarily have a boss or a manager above them, and they don't want a boss or manager above them. But of course, in these kind of scenarios, it can be a little more chaotic or a little more difficult to check up on things, or to self-management is hard. and peer management is hard. So what we're focused on is making that aspect easier for these people, for people to, actually be able to interact in these structures without issues.
Yeah, no, please say more. Like, why? Yeah, why is it hard? I think there's obviously like a bad faith scenario, right? Where people are like, yeah, people report on things when they haven't done, right? But I don't think we're heavily considering these cases. We're considering like really like goodwill people trying to like quantify and qualify what they do, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this part always gets interesting, but I mean, as much as I hate to say it, the reason why managers, for example, exist is for them to kind of be this intermediary or this middleman that kind of just makes sure that things happen the way they're supposed to, or make sure that people are doing what they said they do.
Yeah.
But I don't think, and of course, the existence of all these structures means many people agree. I don't think that those are necessary. I think it is possible to operate in a way where people are managing themselves. It is, and of course, it is more difficult. It tends to be more difficult because, for example, if I'm doing all this work, if I'm, working hard all day as a regular worker, I may not necessarily have the time to go and make sure my peer or my fellow worker is also doing it, or even to go and maybe do financials, for example. But with the addition of tools that make it easy to use and make these kind of make these kind of examples where we're doing this collective management together, I don't have to worry as much about, I don't have time for this. This is taking too much time out of my day. It just makes that interaction much easier. And what that allows is for trust to develop amongst, me and my community, or you and your community. And also this also sense of pride that we're doing this cool stuff. And we're not doing it, under somebody, or we're not doing it for a boss. We're doing it with ourselves and for ourselves.
Yeah, no, that is incredibly cool. Yeah, wow. This is kind of inspiring because you're kind of building. I'm hearing that you're building a future of work where everyone is like autonomous and they're like self-driven and they're building together this belief or like this project they all believe in, and they're just like kind of celebrating each other's work and kind of celebrating each other's contributions in that sense.
And it's a beautiful thing. But that, to me, that's definitely the goal, because obviously I've worked in traditional structures before. I've had bosses, and for me, it's like, who am I doing this work for? What am I doing this work for? It's always for the boss, and it's always for the company. So then you ask yourself, okay, is everything I'm going to do going to be owned by somebody?
Yeah.
Is there ever going to be a point where I'm owning my own work, or we're owning our own work together? And this is what we're focused a lot more on, bringing out this kind of, and again, it just goes back to co-ops, and it goes back to like these bottom-up collectives that have always been working with each other. And we're just we're trying to hypercharge that or super drive that to a lot more people and a lot more types of organizations so that they can do the same thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's pretty exciting. Yeah, like how do you think this technology that Govrn's building can best empower workers, like a normal, well, yeah, like workers? What type of worker? And like, do we feel like, are we there yet? Like the technology is mature enough yet for just like many workers to use it and feel empowered by that tool?
That's such a great question. I think we're close. There's, I mean, so with the blockchain aspect or the Web3 apps aspect, that part is still a little difficult, but I think we're much closer now to making that just easy for anyone to jump in and use without having to worry about, I have to set up a wallet and things like that. I think there's a lot of stuff coming where that's just going to be much easier. And yeah, in total, I definitely think Govrn can help a lot with these kind of things. And I think even at the beginning, just instilling this idea of what autonomy is, right? Just getting people to very simply write and record their own work.
Mm-hmm.
already brings this kind of sense of ownership, and especially with the the on chain or the work on blockchain aspect of it too, you again get that sense of, hey, who owns this work? Oh, my boss doesn't own it. I own it, and I can go and look and interact with it, and I can also see where other people are validating the work that I did. And we're also eventually, like actually very soon, building an aspect of rewards as well, where anyone, literally anyone in the world, can send you a reward for the work that you've done if they think it's, if they thought it was interesting, if they thought it was useful or cool. But that's a newer aspect, and that's coming soon.
Yeah, no, say more, please. Yeah, if you can say more. Yeah, how does this all tie into compensation? Because yeah, like because it feels like a pretty radically different compensation model, right? Because like I think for a project I coordinate, there is like self-report, but also like intersubjective report where you allocate tokens to other people and you kind of evaluate each other's work on that regard. Whereas I'm hearing like you report like autonomous instance of your work, and like reward kind of comes when people think is valuable. But what if nobody thinks it? No, what if no one like? What if it's overlooked, right? Like, what if it's one of the like really important but like kind of boring jobs that are less cool? Yeah, how does the whole compensation piece come in?
Yeah, and there's multiple layers to that, because one of the other big things that we thought about as we were building this is that what you just said at the end is exactly the thing, right? Where a lot of people's work, especially in less organized structures, a lot of people's work does get overlooked, and especially when if people are online, if they're working together on a platform, for example. Maybe the loudest person or the person who speaks the most is always recognized, or maybe someone else is doing a really important project, but they're much more quiet. Their work doesn't get recognized. So even and again, it's multi-layered. So at the foundation of it is them pushing that work forward and pushing the record of that work forward, where everyone can see in one place. So there's never any question of, oh, what is this person actually doing? It's right there for the entire community, for the entire group to see without question. And again, as things get verified, as they get validated, your work doesn't get overlooked anymore. And that I think that is the most fundamental piece of it. And then once that's there, the aspect of compensation just gets easier. It doesn't get automatically solved, obviously, but I think having that there already makes that kind of interaction so much easier, to where, once people can actually see it. And again, people anywhere, if you allow, people anywhere can see that. So even because a lot of times the work you've done for one company or for one group can actually be really valuable to some other group that maybe is that you're working with, or that is partnering with you. So it just opens up really many different opportunities for, again, this idea of reward or this idea of compensation. And compensation overall is a really complex subject. But the way we think about it is establishing these building blocks, or establishing this foundation of contributions, this foundation of work, so that everything else can pretty much be built on top of it.
Yeah, no, that sounds really exciting. I can totally hear that you're building this like foundational like reputation. You can call it reputation project, identity project, but ultimately it's like a way to create autonomy, or like a way to recognize one's labor, right? And that's yeah, like that sounds extremely exciting. Yeah, I'm so curious. I'm also excited about it. Do you have like an imaginary like scenario that you want to see in the real world? Say like in like a year or like 2 years. I don't know.
Oh wow. Let's say 5 years, because I don't want to sell anything short.
Yeah, okay, good. That's good.
But I do really think, especially when we're looking at DAOs, for example, if we're looking at these kind of blockchain collectives, And a big issue is that there's still, when it comes to these collectives, there's still not that much interaction in most of the global south yet. But I do think it's coming. I think there's just some, on ramp and off ramp interactions that are improving.
Right.
So I think with that, so because of that, we've also seen most of the DAOs that have happened, that have been created, are maybe US centric, maybe Euro centric, which happens a lot of the time with a lot of different types of technology. But I think as this stuff gets more distributed, and as these projects and tools that we're working on make things easier to interact with, we're going to see a lot of very interesting and very cool projects and communities and collectives come from the global south, and like marginalized communities in general, and communities that don't necessarily have typical access to a lot of funding. And I think that's going to open up a lot of these collectives and these groups to, one, create the type of work environment that they want, where they can work with each other without having to worry about hierarchy, and two, again, open them up to many kinds of funding, especially when crypto is involved, because again, crypto is global. So, and you don't necessarily have to worry about a bank giving you access or things of that nature. So I think the combination of those two things is really going to open up what regular people on the ground can do and what they have access to.
Right. Yeah, I was fully like preparing to hear you say like, "Oh, there's a whole revolution happening somewhere." People are all using Govrn to track the anarchist posters they make. I'm just kidding.
And I mean, I will be completely honest. We built this to be as anarchist as possible.
Yeah, because autonomy, I think, even like not anarchist, it's a very it's a way to empower individuals, right, and let individuals kind of have a way to make their voice heard, which is super important lesson in the labor world, is how do one make a voice for themselves.
Yeah, autonomy and agency is 100% the goal, and it is honestly what we built this around, and also this idea of what does it mean to kind of build trust at scale in terms of the work that we're doing and the work that we're interacting with, that we can all, because some of these communities and collectives, they may have 10 people, they may have 20 people, but some have 100 people, some have 1,000 people. So it's also about making sure these interactions stay possible and easy to interact with, no matter what the size is as well. So we're also really focused on that, and this idea of like trust frameworks. What are these mechanisms that people use to instill trust in each other and the work that they're doing? But that would be a whole other hour.
Yeah, no, right. Word. Yeah. Wow. This is, there is so much there. Yeah, I look forward to seeing just like normal people or like common people being able to at least try it out. At least try out what does it mean not to just have things on the checklist, but work autonomously and have their work be recognized and be attested. Right. I guess like another thing this reminds me of is like the gig economy or like freelancer economy, because you mentioned the global south. I think a lot of people or like people from the global south, but also people around the world, like transnationally, kind of use these like freelancer platforms, right, to get work, to get paid. Yeah, I wonder like how like has Govrn thought about like use cases with say like freelancers, because I think they are in dire need of like having attestation, having like a permissionless platform instead of like Upwork.com or like freelancer.com or something.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the biggest problem with the gig economy is that it created this interaction that so many people have, and I mean, a lot of people are involved in it, but it's very centralized and it's very hierarchical, because it's weird, right? Because you have a small sense of autonomy, in that you're just going out there and doing the work. But at the end of the day, you are only doing the work for maybe this large company like Uber or this large company like Upwork. And they are getting the vast majority of those benefits. So now it's like with these kind of structures, and what we're hoping to build out for as well is, okay, what would it look like to have this kind of interaction or have this kind of real autonomy in the work where maybe you're not working for an Upwork, maybe you're working with a group of 10 people who are doing the same things that you are. And now you understanding how to, well, really just how to work as a collective, how to distribute as a collective and things like that. And I think what that looks like in the long run is instead of all these resources going towards one giant global company, now you have all these different collectives who are working together. And hopefully, with blockchain as a whole, these collectives can also eventually create this global network. But it's a decentralized network and it's a bottom up network rather than one massive top down network.
Yeah, yeah. I think like also yeah, like the economy market is also really weird. Like there's this like huge competition for price. Not competition, but rather like, the price can be because there is like global different living conditions, cost of living are different. And I think like the price, certain things, certain tasks, the price gets priced way down. And there is
Right.
no good guarantees for other things like benefits and whatever. And yeah, also like what does fairness and compensation mean when yeah, like living condition and cost of living are vastly different. Yeah, I mean like yeah, a
Exactly.
lot of problems there, but to like because we're all like kind of new, but also not so new to like having a global workforce.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, we're gonna have to do another one of these.
I know, right? Just like I think I'm super excited. Just like workers, Web3 workers around the world, or just like workers around the world. Because I mean, I'm not American either. I'm just hanging out here. Um, yeah. Um, cool. Wait. More questions. I have a couple more
Sure.
questions. I guess like one more thing that I just want to get your opinion on. Okay, so there are like I think Govrn is extremely exciting new technology, right? Like, what other new technology do you see that can empower workers that you are excited about?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I guess staying in the same sphere of like the whole Web3 thing. I'm really interested to see what. So there are a lot of DAO tools and like DAO infrastructure interactions happening, and I think again that's all about creating these kind of group constructs or collective constructs that don't necessarily have hierarchy, or at least are minimizing the hierarchy as much as possible. Um, and I'm thinking of potential. So, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with Joke Race.
Say more. I think for the sake of listeners.
So, Joke Race is really interesting, and they really embody the whole, you know, thing that starts off kind of as a toy, but eventually becomes this like really fundamental technology. They're kind of focused on actually in a very similar way to how we're focused on creating this kind of empowerment for bottom up work. They're creating this kind of similar interaction for bottom up governance. So, and I think they work well together as well because governance can be voting, governance can be work. There are different ways to governance is just about making decisions at the end of the day. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of drive that decision making. But Joke Race allows for just a very easy way to bring people together and let them have more say in terms of what people want to do. Because a lot of times with voting, in kind of any kind of structure, including in national structures, it tends to be just kind of a yes and no thing, or I want this person but not this person. And what Joke Race is doing is just creating more kinds of interactions where it's like, and we see this across the board as well in other forms in terms of like quadratic voting and things like that. But they're just providing a fun and interesting way to make your decisions known, especially for people within a collective.
Yeah. No, I've been kind of following that project. It looks really exciting. Like it's another like project. I'm just like kind of like watching and like hoping it like take off and everybody started doing it. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, like it's like one interesting experiment with thinking about governance, right? For sure.
for sure. And there are other ones like guilds, for example, that are looking at just how these kind of communities interact in general. And I think really the potential, most important thing or the potential big win here is for all of these tools to eventually work together and kind of interact with each other to where, let's say, for example, you're using Govrn as this kind of foundation of work. But once you have that as this fundamental piece, you can also use these contributions and use these attestations or validations to then interact with, say, governance with joke race or identity with some of these other, or reputation rather, with some of these other projects where you're interacting with these all together and they're all working together and you're using one piece at a time in a very easy way to create this entire ecosystem that your little community maybe can interact with, again, super easily, but also in a super empowering way, because now you have access to all of these different tools that work together that you wouldn't have had access before. And maybe if you weren't using, say, a Web3 company, or if you weren't using, say, a DAO tooling platform, if you're using more of a Web 2, what we call Web 2, or maybe a more centralized one, it would end up like you may end up having platform lock where you just end up being stuck on this one platform. You can't easily go from one to the other. Or it just, because it's so, because of the way it's structured, it doesn't have your specific needs in mind. And it just makes it much harder for you to do what you need to do. But with these kind of interactions, with these kind of Web3 companies and Web3 projects and protocols, it's much easier to find exactly what you need and make sure you're just kind of picking and choosing these different kinds of interactions. And at the end of the day, they will all work together. That's my vision of it, at least.
That's a good one. Modularity.
100%.
Modularity. Great. Ward, thank you so much for being on the pod with us. We would love to leave some space to our listeners and for you to tell people how to follow your work.
For sure. You can find me mainly on Twitter. I'm very loud on there. You can find me at Stef Delev, so it's STEF DELEV. That's on Twitter. But you can also find me like on any other platform, or at least any other, LinkedIn if you use that for some reason, or or things like that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for your time. We're really excited to have you.
For sure. And of course, you can also find Govrn on Twitter at Govrn HQ, Caribbean Blockchain Alliance at CBA Hub. And yeah, those are pretty easy to find and interact with as well.
Perfect. We'll drop them in the show notes. All right. Thank you. Have a good one.